Welcome once again to A Night for Truth, conversations on the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand, the great Roman Catholic philosopher and theologian and moral thinker, I might say. Our guest of honor is Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, Dietrich von Hildebrand's wife. We have been speaking of many of the topics which arise in his great book, Transformation in Christ, and in our last episode we were speaking of the quality of mercy, some of the distinctions. That mercy is not synonymous with compassion, for example. Mercy is compassion simply being our human ability to suffer with someone or to feel with them in their suffering, but we're helpless to do anything about it, whereas mercy comes, as it were, more often than not, from the higher to the lower, you might say, from the king to his subject, from God to us. It comes from someone who can do something about the dislocation or the injustice or the suffering which has occurred. Mercy does not, should we say, muddy the waters of justice. It doesn't violate truth. It is a great gesture, I might say, on the part of God towards us. One of the sentences which I like very much in Dietrich von Hildebrand's chapter on holy mercy is this: the true object of mercy is not this or that misfortune as such, but the general helplessness and frailty of man under the sway of original sin. That's a tremendous vista which we have there. It's an all-encompassing vista. I would like to start, in one sense, with a bang here and jump right into the middle. There is a context in which all of us, religious or non-religious, find ourselves confronted with the word mercy, and I would be interested to know what remarks your husband would have on this. The phrase is mercy killing. Is that a contradiction?
You know, he was already concerned about it.
And he was writing when it was not a wholesale industry.
No, but
the way it is now.
You know, because of
his
prophetic sight, he knew that he was coming. Now, I mean, of course, this is a contradiction in term. And why do people endorse mercy killing? Because it's getting to be more and more popular. As you know now, it is accepted in Holland. And once it is accepted in Holland, because many sicknesses are contagious, it's going to spread further and further and further. People that are my age might still make it, but people in their 50s, might be helped to go to another life much before they prefer to be going themselves. Why is it simply a contradiction in terms? Number one, because in many cases, in innumerable cases, and I can give concrete examples of that, what people cannot stand is a sight of someone suffering. It is something which is so incredibly trying when you are next to someone that you love and this person is suffering, cries of anguish or pains or whatever it must be. And all that you can do is to be compassionate, to hold their hand, to say to them that you love them, but you cannot take away this terrible thing. In order to convince people of the legitimacy of euthanasia, of mercy killing, people have invented a slogan. And in one of our programs, maybe we could do that too, is to show the danger of slogans. Slogans are used to bypass man's reasoning power and to use a formula that has something very pregnant, very powerful, which is convincing even though no arguments are given.
Something like pro-choice.
Well, pro-choice is one of them, but I mean in the case of euthanasia, it is death with dignity. Now, the dignity of death is not that I'm nice and clean and nothing is happening to me and so on and so on, the dignity of death is to be united to the suffering Christ on the cross.
Which was certainly not, the crucifixion was not a death with dignity in the sense.
It is the most opposed to it that you can, opposite to it that you can possibly imagine, because you just imagine the concrete horror of the crucifixion. You know what, that when Christ was hanging on the cross, he was choking because he could no longer breathe. I mean, it is the very opposite of it. First of all, I mean, therefore, the Christian notion of the dignity of suffering and the fact that suffering has been a means that God chose to save us from eternal damnation is one thing. Number two, it totally deprives suffering of any meaning. You see, very much as if suffering was an illegitimate burden that is put upon man, and therefore, in the name of mercy, we've got to eliminate it. Why in the world should I suffer? This is something that I've heard many, many times in the classroom. I mean, after all, I'm quite a nice person and this and that. Why should I suffer? I don't want to suffer. And if I am to suffer, then I prefer to take my life, and that is the end of it. I just shoot my brain, and that's all there is to it. Number three, it is based on the assumption that because suffering is meaningless, the sufferings that I undergo is not going to help me pay my debts. And you know, one of the things that we have said in a previous program, when I come to contrition, and I look back upon my life, and I see all these black spots, even in deeds that were good, but nevertheless it was 5, 10, 15% that was not that good. You know, there was self-interest, or there was some reason to make an impression on another person, or whatever it might be. And suddenly I see myself in front of God in all my misery, and I know I have to pay a debt. And I cry, say, let me pay my debt. You know, I'm anxious to do so. You know, my husband told a very, very striking story of a friend of his who was a chaplain in a prison. And a man was a butcher and had committed an abominable crime, and that was, I don't know, 80 years ago, something of the sort, maybe 90 years ago. And he had killed his wife and cut her to pieces. And then the whole thing was discovered, and he was condemned to death. And then this priest kept visiting him and visiting one very fine day through God's grace. He truly saw the horror of what he had done and had a deep, deep and profound contrition. And was a changed man. And it does happen in jails that some people truly convert in jail. Some of them become worse, and some of them convert because they're given a good book, because the priest comes to them, because they happen to watch good television instead of watching pornography, which doesn't make them any better. And it changed so radically that this chaplain wanted him, you know, his sentence to be commuted and simply said to life imprisonment. And this man said, no, Father, death alone is an adequate punishment for what I have done. And he did not want his sentence to be commuted because he was convinced this is the price that he had to pay. Now, suppose that there is no eternal life, no immortality, and so on and so on. The picture is very different. But if you understand, as most people have accepted for centuries and centuries and centuries, and I'm starting with Plato in a very striking fashion, that we have an immortal soul, and that at death we're going to be judged according to our actions, and if we have acted badly, we're just going to go through purgatory. And then if you know anything about purgatory, it is obviously suffering. But a suffering which is welcome, because once again you're conscious of the fact that you're paying your debt, so you, so to speak, take away from this person the chance of already diminishing the pains of purgatory by saying, so I'm going to send you to heaven immediately. You know, therefore there's a selfishness, there's a brutality about this type of practice, which is very popular in the United States.
Wouldn't you say, or let me phrase it this way, can we say that the act of mercy killing presupposes two notions that no Catholic, no Christian at all could buy into, and it's a terrible act of hubris, of pride, of arrogating to myself the position of God. Number one, it assumes that there is no meaning to suffering, that this is pointless.
That is crucial.
And secondly, it assumes, really, I suppose, that death is the end of the story, and that there is nothing for which we are answerable after death, and therefore, when I inject whatever it is into your veins, you simply go into a state of non-being. But those are two enormous assumptions that no mortal has got any warrant at all to make. Number one, suffering is meaningless. I take it upon myself to declare that the suffering is meaningless, and secondly, that I and you, my patient who want to die, and so on, that we are masters of death. In a way, it derives from the disappearance of mystery from the entire modern consciousness.
The metaphysical arrogance that I'm the master of life and death, and you find something similar in abortion. But you see, in some way, even though I do not believe that slogans are a good way of influencing people, but I'll be very tempted to write some big fat letters. Mercy killing is merciless. Because, the last thing that a person does is to accept that a crime, that a murder be committed. That is the last thing that he does. Suppose I'm suffering dreadfully, and you have a doctor with me, and I say, please give me an injection, and that is going to be the end of it. By accepting, by begging you to kill myself, in this very moment, my last act is a choice of suicide. This is why I end my life on something which is dreadful. This is why I recall, the horror that I experienced when I was a child, and, because of my Catholic education, I had a fair knowledge of the Old Testament, starting at the age of 5 and so on. And you recall when Saul, the king of Israel, is defeated by the Philistines, Philistines, and then he's wounded. And then he says to his officer, kill me.
Yes.
And then the other one refuses. And then he puts his own sword and kills himself. It made such a dreadful impression upon me that his last act was an act of revolt, metaphysical revolt against God, because he is the master of life and death. And the first thing that I must accept as Christian is to say, when you call me, my God, I'll be there.
In an awful sense, mercy killing and suicide involve, one hates to say it, but they involve really a dreadful sort of pride, because I do arrogate to myself a responsibility and a knowledge which only the Most High has. Another facet of this same question, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, just for a minute. But surely, Lily, abortion in 9 cases out of 10 is merciful. The poor woman, she wasn't planning to have this baby. Right now she's got a career, she's got things she has to do. A baby will simply wreck everything. Or worse yet, here is some family, they've already got innumerable children, they haven't got 2 brass farthings to rub together. There's a very easy way out. Surely that's merciful, really.
This is precisely how it is presented. But in fact the very opposite is true. Number one, a child is such a mystery. It is something so unbelievable. But the union, the embrace between husband and wife, can contribute to a new life. I say can because obviously they cannot control it. Many couples would like to have a child and cannot have a child. If they cannot have a child, they would resent it and do everything in their power to have one. If they happen to have one, they don't want it because it's not convenient. Once again, they want to play providence. They want to be those who decide. They never know whether this child is not going to be a tremendous blessing which is going to change their lives. But the thing that I believe we should advocate more and more is that abortion, of course it murders a baby. Everybody knows that. And if you deny it, simply you're closing your eyes to evidence. But it is a destruction of women. It destroys them spiritually, religiously, psychologically, and physically. I claim that abortion is one of the most brutal things against the dignity of women. And in my niece, Dr. Marie Peters-May, who is a world specialist on the post-abortion syndrome, and has given very striking, very beautiful talks at HLI and all over the world. As a matter of fact, she's lectured in innumerable countries. She has interviewed thousands of women and claims that in every single case, the destruction that takes place in them, because they have murdered their baby. And it comes back to them, maybe after 1 year, after 5 years, after 10 years, and they become suicidal and suddenly have these nightmares of they're telling the baby and saying, "Nanny, keep me," and you take a dagger and you kill them. And they are driven to despair. They desperately need help to believe that God's mercy is so infinite that in spite of the horror of their deed, you see, of course they have plenty of excuses, but we always have excuses. I mean, there's always an excuse for a sin. I steal because I wanted to have more money, or I lied because I want to get out of a scrape, or I have adultery because I was tempted by lovely legs, and that sort of things, and you go on. And there's always a perfectly good excuse for a sin. But you see the horror of it. And today, we live in a world of lies. All this is totally hidden from the public. The only thing which is presented is a dramatic situation. And I recall Cardinal O'Connor in New York City giving a talk and saying, any woman who is pregnant and expecting a child is to come to us, will never turn anyone off.
Begged the public for years.
Mother Teresa of Calcutta did the same thing. That thousands of organizations, please, and thousands of people in the United States, begging to have children and say no. My godchild, just adopted a little girl from Russia because, in the United States, the children are killed or they don't want to give them to you for some reason. So, therefore the whole thing is a devilish lie. And don't forget, Christ said in the Gospel, the devil is the father of lies. And we live in a society when lies, you find it in news media, you find it in newspaper, you find it all over, and people are confused, and obviously we always like the easiest way out.
It seems to me that one of the most frightening aspects of the entire phenomenon, every aspect of which is frightening, the killing of a baby, the arrogating to myself of the disposition of life and death, the ignoring of the fact that this child, they like to call it the tissue, is a person with a name that God knows. A frightening aspect of the whole thing to me is that most, I don't know, of the women who go through that, as you pointed out a minute or two ago, it can be 5 or 10, 15 years later that suddenly the horror of the thing comes back to them, but at the time, all they're thinking of is, I've been set free. Hooray! I've gotten rid of this troublesome thing. They have bought into the massive, the multi-layered lie that a baby is an interruption.
But
and they've bought into that.
Yes, but Nanit claims that not that very many women want abortion. It is usually the parents, or it is the boyfriend says, you're not going to have an abortion, very good, I'm going to drop you. Maybe it's 20% of them what I want an abortion, but most of them, in my own family, this tragic case has taken place. You see, a girl of 16 is pregnant, and the mother says, well, either you're on the street or you have an abortion.
So the people, your niece, for example, who know about these situations, would they say that in essentially every case, unless the woman has become totally calloused and totally cauterized morally or truncated,
usually they don't want it.
There is some.
The pressure is put upon them. Someone insists, no, look, you're ruining your career, you're not finished high school, not finished college, you're going to live in poverty, and you're going to be abandoned, and no man is ever going, so on and so on. You see, they feel helpless. And there's, of course, an irony about the whole thing. But if you watch statistics, you're going to see that, in fact, many more baby girls are killed than baby boys.
Yeah.
So once again, yes, for some reason, because some people have the crazy idea they'd rather have a son than a daughter.
I knew it was true in India. I didn't know.
What about China? What about China?
But in
600, I mean, you speak to Steve Mosher, 600, I mean, millions of little girls are abandoned and then killed simply because they're only a girl.
But now what about, aren't we being merciful? Now here's one. Surely, Lily, and I'm being naughty here. Aren't we being merciful to the baby when we through sonar or whatever the medical ways are now of determining things? This is going to be a baby. This is going to be a spina bifida baby. This is going to be a Down syndrome baby. This is going to be a baby with hydrocephalic trouble and so on. Surely that's merciful to assist this baby and go to the trouble to set this infant free from a miserable and a meaningless life.
No, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to say so emphatically that I hope I'm going to convince some of the viewers. What a child desperately needs and desires is to be loved. And now I'm going to mention one person for whom I have a boundless admiration, Joan Andrew Bell. You know, this very shy little girl from Kentucky, who at the very moment that abortion became legal, you know, opposed it from clinic to clinic to try to have them called, was in prison so many times, was thrown into jail in Pensacola in California, in Florida, for 3.5 years in solitary confinement, not permitted to have mass and so on and so on, because she refused to sign a paper saying that she was no longer going to oppose abortion. Well, thank God, good many Catholics and Protestants wrote letters, and then finally after 3.5 years she was liberated. She married Christopher Bell, who is an admirable young man, and she had a little girl. Soon afterwards, she heard about a crippled Mexican boy who is so crippled that he cannot use his arms at all, that he cannot get dressed, that he cannot go to the toilet alone, that he cannot eat alone. He has to lap his food like a cat or a dog, and so on and so on. She showed me a photograph of that little boy who is now 10 or 11. Radiant, because he gets so much love. Yeah. And there are millions of children whose parents are very rich, place the child in front of an awful television, and then enjoy themselves, and they never get that, starving for love. I prefer to have a Down syndrome and receive love. And you know, this is what happens on top of it. I know my niece, by the way, was also a specialist on the Down syndrome affair. These children can be lovely, particularly warm-hearted. What is failing here is to be found there. They're particularly affectionate. What do you have if you have a very smart child who is arrogant and impertinent and knows everything better than you? Now, Joan has adopted 2 little Russian children. What she did not tell me was that both of them have no fingers, they just have a little, because they're the victim of Chernobyl. And so now, and they have no toes and they have no fingers. And she said, you cannot imagine their joy when they manage, with a little stump that they have, to grab something. And he said, the fact, then she has adopted a little black girl from Jamaica because the mother wanted to have an abortion. So now she has 5 children. They live in great poverty, and there is joy because there is love. And now she said to me, pray that we can still adopt. I heard that there are 3 little Chinese children that need to be adopted. No, you know, love is the secret and the response, and not simply comfort and money and giving a child whatever and spoiling to death.
When you look straight at the scenario like this, the whole panorama, you realize that in fact it is 2 different worlds, and I'm afraid those 2 worlds are called heaven and hell.
Yes.
I mean, this wonderful household. My sister has some friends, and they have, it's either 18 or 20 adopted children, all of whom are outrageously disabled. It is the world's happiest household. It's a fountainhead of joy. this is a foretaste of heaven.
Of course.
Hell is the place where I have said one too many times, I'm God. I am in charge of life, death, and so on. Well, we must once again reluctantly draw to a close our discussion. We have been talking of a particular aspect of something which in our own time, alas, calls itself mercy, and which turns out to be a dreadful tragedy of mercy. In fact, it is merciless. The practice of abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, and so on. We are continuing to consider the works of Dietrich von Hildebrand, and we hope you will join us for further conversations in the series A Night for Truth.